Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be talking about building a security program that every CISO wants. I'll be your host, Matt Radulak, Senior Director of Incident Response and Cloud Operations. And we're really excited to be joined by two titans in security. One, Julie Talbot-Hubbard, Senior Vice President of Cyber Protection and Identity at Optiv, and Rachel Wilson, Head of Data Security at Morgan Stanley. Rachel, if you want to say hello, and we'll start with you. I'd be really interested in figuring out what the path was for you in your career, and really kind of how did you find yourself here with us today, other than maybe us asking you to be here? Maybe we can leave that part out, right?
Sure, Matt. Well, it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you and Julie and our audience today. My path to being, head of data security for Morgan Stanley Wealth Management really started straight out of graduate school, where I went right to the National Security Agency. I had always wanted to be a technologist. I had always wanted to serve my country and work in government. And so I spent my first 15 years all at the NSA. I ran the NSA's counterterrorism operations mission for a couple of years, using technical means to get onto the devices used by terrorists. I spent a couple of years in the UK, actually getting ready for the 2012 Summer Olympics. As you'll appreciate, Matt, we had all number of cyber threats to those Olympics. The Chinese trying to hack into the clocks and timers at the Olympic venues, Russians trying to hack into the databases that house the Olympic drug testing records, all kinds of miscreants looking to rub grit in the eyes of the British. And then after the games went off without a hitch, the NSA lured me back to suburban Maryland, where I lived for all these years, to what I would tell our audience on a personal note, and Julie already knows this was my dream job. So they offered me the opportunity to run the NSA's Remote Operations Center, to lead the cyber exploitation operations mission for the NSA, essentially, America's nation state hackers. And for me, that was an amazing opportunity, both as a technologist to work pretty much every technology on the planet, including a bunch of things you can't even naturally buy in the United States, but also an opportunity to lead a really, large, sophisticated technical workforce in doing a mission that was really challenging, but also pretty profound. So, bringing back really what we used to call eye-watering intelligence, information that when you thought about the fact that you were going to put it on the president's desk the next day, brought a little tear to your eye. So I did that job for 5 years, and then they wanted me to leave and go do a policy job, which did not appeal to me at all, which is why I left government and came to Morgan Stanley as the first head of cybersecurity for our wealth management business, and then subsequently expanded that role to be essentially any way in which we could lose client data. So not just hackers coming in, but malicious insiders, incompetent insiders, computer falls off the back of a truck, physical security of our branches, all of those ways, shapes, and forms that we could lose data, which of course for us is our most prized possession, protecting our clients and their assets. And so, it's been a 20 plus year journey now, but one that I can tell you has taken all kinds of twists and turns I wouldn't have expected, but couldn't be happier with where I am now. And Julie, so excited that, having heard your story before, hearing it again today is going to be awesome.
And I'm going to pose that same question to Julie here in a second. But before I do, you mentioned all these different places that you got to work. And I see some people in the chat telling us where they're attending our forum from today. If you hadn't had a chance to do that, we're always interested to see how big of a global audience we have. Let us know where you're talking to us from. And I'm going to pose that same question to you, Julie. How did you wind up here? Other than being at, one of the leading partners with Varonis, which I got to shout out Optiv for that. But really, what was the path that kind of led you here to join us today?
So, and thank you for the question. And Rachel, your story, it always amazes me just how you've contributed to cybersecurity and the roles that you've held, especially as a woman. So kudos to you and your achievements. My career path was probably a bit different than Rachel's. I started out really in financial services and really around business resiliency, crisis management, but focusing in on how organizations protect themselves from large events. But it could have been like power outage, natural disasters that we were planning for at the time. Where fast forward today, we're planning for cyber resiliency and large attacks. But I started my career there and really, I would say just navigated, really fell in love with the the complexity of what we were trying to solve, but really trying to build cybersecurity programs, risk compliance, all that for large organizations to really help protect themselves. When I started in security, it wasn't, I would say, as mainstream. So you had to do a lot of education, a lot of evangelizing, and really talking to the business and the technology teams to really get them to understand as we were going into new markets, going into more visualization of healthcare or financial services. I look at that as it's a great business opportunity, but it also brings a lot of risk, and really expands that kind of that attack surface for organizations. So, I started my career right, and I've held a lot of cybersecurity different roles and positions across numerous industry verticals. I took a role as the first CISO at the Ohio State University, which again I was in more of large enterprise organizations for most of my career. So that was a big change. We went from protecting financial services and healthcare information to student information. It was a lot of government contracts as well, but we had patients, we had everything in campus, but you had students. So a different threat landscape. And then taking a role at Symantec, where I was their chief security officer. So leading physical security as well as cybersecurity risk and compliance for our clients, but also, we did a lot of business managing trust certificates for our clients. But I also then had to protect all of our source code. And that source code is products that were, again, supporting and helping our military and helping large enterprises protect their endpoints and those things. So, and where I'm at Optiv today, I've taken that knowledge working across industries, and now I get to leverage that to help our clients, whether they be in financial services, healthcare, but really building solutions for them that can help them from anywhere on data security, data privacy, to all the way across financial services. But I would say one piece of advice is always have confidence in yourself. And I think that I tell myself this often, but I think we all need to remember we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that we all grow and take on these challenges when we're in that state. So I'll turn it back over to you, Matt.
Yeah, no, I actually didn't know you were an Ohio State alumni, so I don't think we can carry on. I'm a Penn State alumni. I don't know if we have any other Penn Staters out there. We are, but definitely a tough and fierce rivalry there. But one thing that you said kind of right at the beginning was also a kind of acknowledging that but acknowledging the challenges that you have to overcome as a woman in cybersecurity. I'll be the first to admit there are not as many women in this space as there are men. I certainly hope that we can draw more women into cybersecurity, and maybe if you guys could tell us your story about challenges you've had to overcome being a woman in cyber, maybe we can offer some tips to our viewers.
Sure, Matt. I mean, I can tell you, all of us in women in cybersecurity, I tell people all the time, if you think women in technology, we're about 25%. Cybersecurity, you overlay that, it's about half, about 12%. And then you lay in financial services. And I joke all the time that the four of us know each other really well because we're such a small group. Now, we're fortunate. We had Julie and people like her blazing trails years ago in financial services when things like cyber, as she said, prior to them being mainstream. I think for me, growing up in government, in part of the Defense Department, where you have all of those layers in terms of technology and cybersecurity, and you add in the military on top of that, certainly there are a lot of circumstances where and Julie, I know this is true for you too, where, you're the only woman in the room, you're the only woman at the table. Now you're the only woman in the Zoom session in our post-pandemic world. But I can tell you, my advice would be just be brave, get really comfortable learning in public. Don't be a shrinking violet. Don't feel like you shouldn't say something or don't say something, and go ahead and take that seat at the table. I think all too often, women tend to sort of shrink back and they're waiting to be invited. The world is not going to invite us. We have to invite ourselves.
Oh, I love that, Rachel. And I love the shrinking violet. I'm going to write that down and use that again. But I couldn't agree more. And really my comment on confidence, I do think there's also a piece where when you think about being the only woman at the table, you got to really build that stakeholder. I used to call it the stakeholder map. When I joined any organization, like I would map out who are my stakeholders, who do I need to make sponsors, allies, and that. And I do think that women it's a little more challenging because, again, there's less women. And so naturally men gravitate towards people like themselves. So I do think, building those alliances with individuals, especially in cybersecurity, you've got usually a objective, a mission that everybody doesn't align to. Some people could see that in conflict into their objectives. And so you've really got to work to build that alliance with those stakeholders. And I found that helps a lot alongside with what Rachel shared about, being confident, having your voice at the table. Always bring data. I always would bring data, facts to that conversation. So if I did have a point I needed to make, I had that data to back me up, again, with my allies and things I built around those meeting rooms. That really helped. And I do think that women have a little harder job to do there. Again, just because of just the makeup in diversity, even today, still in tech and cybersecurity.
I really appreciate that you guys sharing that with us. I also, I want to kind of shout out some people in the chat who have been putting in the clapping emojis. Just thank you guys. You clearly made an impact in your career so far on the cybersecurity industry, and will continue to do so. Thanks for carving the way for other people. Now, in that same vein, one thing you both discussed so far is really the different missions that you've supported. And when we think about all the different missions that we support or our attendees support, sometimes we're trying to mitigate different threats. And I'd be curious from your perspective, how has the threat landscape changed in say the last couple of years, and how has that impacted your day-to-day?
So I'll jump in since Rachel went first, and then I'll turn it back over. But if I look at just the last few years, I would say we've gone through a large transformation just in how we operate, how we engage with clients, consumers, employees, where people work. So I think with that shift, we've seen just that threat landscape shift and additional vulnerabilities, maybe where we didn't have to pay attention to that before. So if I think about remote work and about, now you've got individuals connecting into their home network, could be using their own devices, but managing that. And many organizations had to do that rapidly. There wasn't time to plan and figure out all of your security. People had to shift to work from home very quickly. And organizations, don't get me wrong, they plan, but I know a lot of them security was really pushed to act very quickly, which sometimes when we do that, we cut corners. And so I think that changed the threat landscape just on kind of widening that and then changing more some of the vulnerabilities we had to manage. And then you look at cloud, I look at that as the other big kind of change in organizations. And yes, we've talked about digital transformation in cloud for 5-10 years maybe. But I do think the last 2 years has really pushed organizations to move there, and not just organizations moving their data to the cloud or hybrid environments, but also our partners, like solutions like Varonis, whether they be solutions, identity solutions like a identity governance or a PAM solution. Those are now in the cloud as well. And so that has shifted, how we work and how we engage, but also think about misconfigurations. There's just a whole new kind of attack surface that I look at that's been brought about for organizations to manage. So, and in that, I do think that there's just, increased nation state threats, ransomware, there's many others. But again, the big thing is the data now is everywhere, which just brings complexity.
Now, Rich, I want to pose the same question to you, but like I did before, I'd also like to see our audience members, if anybody in the chat wants to share with us, for them, but how has the threat landscape changed in the last couple of years? What have been some drivers or some impacts to that? Really interested in getting to read your feedback, as well as, and Rachel, kind of while we're listening to you, tell us from your perspective, how has the threat landscape changed in the last couple of years?
So Matt, I certainly agree with everything Julie said. And I think for us, it's really just been additive. So, Julie mentions nation states, and certainly in financial services, we're still acutely concerned about North Korea, given their national strategy of funding their government by hacking banks. We still worry about Iran. I mean, there's a lot of scar tissue from those battle days of 2012 to 2014, when you saw a lot of denial of service attacks against banks in that time period. But I think the real sea change, and Julie nailed it, which is now this real rise in what is much more cyber criminal activity. So, I think about where we were 5 years ago, where the majority of, quote unquote, malicious cyber activity on the internet, was people like me in my NSA capacity. It was the Israelis, it was the Brits, it was the Russians. We know all of that is still happening, but that volume of cyber activity is actually now dwarfed by the 75% of malicious cyber activity on the internet that is criminal in nature and that is financially motivated. And so I think for our viewers, the thing to recognize is it used to be, if you had financial data and the ability to move money, if you had healthcare information, you knew you were a target. Now the targeting is much more opportunistic in nature. I mean, these are hackers that are simply taking advantage of, newly weaponized vulnerabilities in the environment, doing broad scans of the internet, looking for anyone who is vulnerable, and then working to monetize that access. Julie's point, ransomware being up 700% in the last 2 years, $20 billion in losses to ransomware just last year in the United States. Those kinds of staggering numbers, it's the kind of thing, as we work with customers and clients and partners, trying to get folks to recognize that, hiding in obscurity is no longer an option, and that everybody needs to be viewing these kinds of attacks much more as a when, not an if, and have really resilient strategies for how they're dealing with them.
What I would add too, Rachel, I couldn't agree more, but I think also with the advances in technology, I always say we're using them to drive business value. And I mean, it could be AI, it could be many different things. The attackers are using those same technologies. So, I mean, that's something where we think about automating and we think about just what we're doing there, machine learning. Those are being leveraged as well in their attacks. And I think that's something when you think about, again, add that with the complexity of environments changing, like we're just seeing a large increase across the board. And your point on the ransomware on like having I call it incident response plan, I mean, from a ransomware attack. And I would say many organizations are developing them. I haven't seen many practice them. And I think that that's something that I think is just really going to hurt us more and more as an industry. Because again, these bad actors, they know that they're increasing them and we've got to have that in place.
Julie, I mean, I'm agreeing with you emphatically because it is probably the number one thing I see with the folks I work with is they all tell me hand over heart that they have their critical data backed up. And we talk through the whole strategy about maintaining those backups. But the practice, the exercise, the actual muscle memory of restoring critical systems from backups, we see so many organizations that don't actually do that. And then when they have their cyber bad day, they're finding their backups are corrupted. The guy who installed that system doesn't work here anymore. All of a sudden, they thought they were in a good place only to find out that they were not. And that's why you see many of these hackers now, these ransomware attacks, so much more sophisticated that when you and I saw it, like even 3 years ago, right, where they're triple extortion scams, where the hackers coming in and stealing data, then encrypting production environments, back-end databases, and then actually starting to charge, subscription service fees for these hackers over time. Never thought we would be living in a world where we would have people paying mafia-style protection money to Eastern European hacking gangs with the intent of trying to protect their systems from other Eastern European hacking gangs. But, that, again, is the brave new world we're living in 2022.
I think I'm so excited to hear both of you talk about cybercrime so passionately. As at Varonis, we've seen the same thing. I serve as our head of incident response, and the quantity of cyber attacks has gone up. And the velocity of those attacks has gone up because of cybercrime. So much so, shameless plug, everybody. I host another show for Varonis called The State of Cybercrime. I'm going to ask my colleagues to drop a link for it in the chat. Feel free to check it out. We actually just hosted an edition of that on Monday. And it's really because it's ever changing. These attacker groups, their techniques are evolving. There are new threat actors that enter the game. It seems like that we're playing whack-a-mole trying to remove threat actors. As I think back to over the last year, Revil or R-Evil, right? They disappeared and came back 6 times. They must have the best PR firm ever, right? That they're just constantly going through a rebranding or kind of a new version release. And I think when we think about the threat landscape and we think about, how it's changed, the other thing I'd be interested in kind of hearing from you guys is really, the landscape has changed. How do programs need to evolve? And even if you wanted to share sort of an evolution from the past that you hope happens again, what do we need to do to, do I ever think we're going to be ahead? I don't know. But what do we need to do to keep up? How can security programs continue to evolve?
So I can jump in, I guess. When I look at how do you really keep up with the business and the trends and everything else? Because essentially that's what's happening, right? I mean, our businesses are, and it could be business in terms of financial services, healthcare, all these industries, they're having to really adopt technology at its core more and more, which again drives again different connected devices, different connected systems, again, just kind of widens that attack surface. So my, I guess how I see it evolving is I think security programs, they must get more aligned with the business. And not, I'm not saying not technology, but technology is really becoming the business in many of our industries. If you even look at healthcare and the advances made there, from pacemakers, insulin, like all the pumps, everything they're doing from an IoT device, it's coming there. So I would say the first thing is really just understand from a security leader, like understand where the business is going, like, and maybe where they're at today, where they're going to, and really ensuring that you're building out your security program and your skills, because that's a key piece. We all know there's a lot of skill gaps across organizations today and the industry, but that I think is really paramount. And I also think that, many organizations have moved beyond perimeter security. I still think that some are still acting in that way, but I think really designing your security strategy and I'll put the data at the core again, and understanding where your most critical data asset is and kind of building your parameters, your controls really around that. As you're looking at where that business, where that industry is going, is going to become more critical to us. Because I think that speed that we've seen organizations adopt technology in all different business sectors today is just going to increase. And I don't really know how to keep up unless you're looking to say, okay, here's where the business is going. Here's what we're adopting. And how is this security? How are we embedding it in? And I think we've talked about application security. We talked about, I remember doing scans, making the app developers do scans at an organization 12 years ago, and trying to build that security mindset when they're designing code. And you think about how we've transitioned and how software now, it's connecting everything. It's running everything. And so if we're not building that security in kind of within the development teams and like building that into the code at the beginning, it's going to become it's just going to be difficult to manage and put our arms around. So those are some of the shifts that I see coming or that we need to make in the strategies. Rachel, I'll turn over to you.
Oh, Julie, I totally agree. And I think the first point you made around, it used to be security could be a little bit of an island, a little bit of an ivory tower, kind of off to one side.
Reading everybody's email, right? Just off to the side. Yeah.
Issuing grand proclamations and hoping for the best, right? That approach, that sort of CISO in a tower thing, I think we're hopefully years beyond that now. There's a reason why Matt and Julie in my job, I actually sit in the wealth management business. My team of technologists fully aligned, part of the management committee. And it's for exactly the reason you highlighted, Julie, that if security is off to one side, you're going to miss those opportunities to bake things in from the beginning. And I think there's another side of that too, which is many, many businesses are recognizing that getting security right is really existential to their business model. That when you think about what our clients, our customers expect of us, if we do this right, if we do this well, for us as businesses, this is part of our competitive advantage. This is actually a differentiator. And while, you're not going to hear firms screaming from the rooftops that they think they're best in class from a cybersecurity perspective, recognizing that puts a target on their back, there is a desire in the business to be able to have those quiet conversations that says, actually, we really care about this and we've invested in this and we see security as part of our business strategy. So I think things have to come together from both of those perspectives. And then I love the point you made around our developers. I think for a while, we were all trying to make our developers cybersecurity experts. That didn't work, right? These people want to build things. They want to write code. We want to support them in that. And so it becomes all about establishing those guardrails, ways to make getting to the cloud both faster and secure, being able to do those production releases in a way that gives us high confidence from a security software development lifecycle, but isn't onerous to the point where we're expecting, as you noted, Julie, developers to be doing their own scans and getting endless code scanning results that then bury them in false positives. Those things, I think, have changed dramatically in all the right ways, where we in security now are really focused on enabling the business and enabling our technology community to move faster in developing the things that the business needs.
No, I
I
couldn't
wanna
agree more.
sorry, go ahead, Julie.
And I've always said too, like the harder you make cybersecurity, like if you put in additional rules or things, people will just go around them. Like again, we've got to support the business, and I think developers they're no different.
Yep.
I think that's
Well,
the usability side of the triangle, right? So go ahead, Rachel.
absolutely, Matt. I mean, that's exactly it. And you think about it, it really extends to all of our end users. I mean, if we make, I tell people all the time, if we wanted to make a place perfectly secure, we would just, disconnect it from the internet. But then we'd be out of business really quick. And so how do we implement things that are pragmatic, that protect our end users, developers or otherwise, from themselves, but still allow them to be functional? And I think that's an area, Julie, to your point, talking about remote work, we've really had to have a lot of ebb and flow. I mean, we're doing things now collectively in the security space that I can tell you would have made me really uncomfortable 3 years ago, but we're also doing things that I think people would have said. You think about the advancements in implementing multi-factor authentication across huge remote workforce. We would have thought that was too hard to do pre-pandemic. Turned out we all did that pretty darn well, and the world didn't end. This is an opportunity for us in the security space to continue to push the envelope on some of these things that from an end user perspective were viewed as, a bridge too far, too much, too fast. Now it turns out we can do those things. And selfishly for us in the security space, I think we have an opportunity to, press our advantage in this environment.
Now, before I have a couple more questions for you guys. I hope you guys got some more time for us. But before I get there, the chat has been absolutely blowing up since we started talking about these two topics, the programs evolving and the threat landscapes. And I just want to shout out a couple of things that come in. And one question that came in that I can't wait to ask you guys. So Bobby B, shout out. The threat has evolved a lot from purely complex technical vulnerabilities to, misconfigurations, coding errors by developers, and the all-encompassing social engineering. And I think there's really a lot to be said here. And Julie and Rachel, you both touched on this. Configuration management is becoming a lot more important because you can't really control all of the traffic to and fro all of your devices, but you can make sure that the light switches and the knobs are all in the correct positions all the time and monitor and enforce those things being that way. I just want to echo that sentiment. At Varonis, we focus a lot kind of to quantify these things on a phrase you use, the attack surface, right? The ever-growing and ever-changing attack surface, Julie, like all the things that could be attacked. We are adding more things. I can't think of a single organization that we work with that isn't adding more things to be attacked, right? But you also have to counter look at that at what's the blast radius? What is the impact of any one of those things getting compromised, right? That user, that device, that application, that link, whatever this thing is, what would that business impact be? And one thing I just want to reinforce that both of you said is make that about how it could impact your business. And that might be a great way to be successful. Another thing that you both touched on, though, and this was really from one of our audience members as well. I'm trying to find out who it was. Maybe Frank, if you're out there, you can help me with that. Oh, yeah. Shout out to John B. Talking about, quiet quitting, talking about the hiring challenges that we're facing. I know that might not be the most technical topic that we have, but I'm curious if you guys have anything to share about, hiring, retaining talent, motivating talent, and trying and kind of like keeping employees motivated.
Well, Matt, you have us all over the waterfront here. We're going to go in a million different directions.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So based on everything you just said, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree that, and I never would have thought this 5 years ago, that configuration drift management is a massive part of a CISO's job in this day and age. The points Julie's been making about knowing where your data is, recognizing that you can't protect everything to the same degree. So, what are your crown jewels that you've got to know day in, day out? To your point, Matt, that the knobs and levers are set in the right place and that you have zero tolerance for unanticipated shift in those spaces. I think that's crucial. I also agree wholeheartedly with the point you made that this is no longer just about, sophisticated, advanced, persistent threat type attackers. So much of what in financial services our regulators are expecting of us is not just to be resistant to social engineering when it comes to employees, the classic sort of call center scenarios, but it's actually to get into the headspace of our customers and know, is a customer under duress? Are they doing this under false pretenses? Is our authentication schema, our fraud prevention analytics, are they robust enough to handle even people outside my perimeter being socially engineered? So huge emphasis on that. And then to your point around hiring and recruitment, this is why, I'm increasingly telling, small and mid-sized companies, the degree to which you can outsource as much as humanly possible of your cybersecurity apparatus. That was a good strategy 3 years ago. I think that's a mandatory strategy today, because I think about the struggles I have, Fortune 50, trying to hire, recruit, hire, retain technical cybersecurity talent. If I can keep someone for 6 months, I consider that to be, an incredible feat. The level of turnover is tremendous. The salary demands are mind-blowing. And I think, for those of us, again, trying to be world-class cyber defense organizations within our own four walls in 2022, really, really difficult thing, which again is why I'm telling people outsource, outsource, outsource. Don't try to be doing this yourself. Because you're going to end up with someone's ne'er-do-well nephew running your cybersecurity program, and that's going to end poorly.
And, Julie, I know and we're all over the place, and I'm just like so excited to have some time with the two of you guys to share all of these insights with everyone. But as someone who helps fill that need, do you have anything that you want to add, Julie, about hiring, about staffing, about just kind of like reinforcing some of the things our audience has come up with so far?
Yeah, I mean, on the just on the talent challenges and the quiet quitting, like I was on a panel last week and that was a big discussion. And I do think that's real. I think people are also becoming disengaged a bit too, just because of again, you had kind of went through COVID pandemic and then we had this, I feel like this surge, like everyone's back to normal. And that's creating a lot of churn. But, I would say I've seen what Rachel shared. I mean, more of, people with salary offers that they're just, making demands or just kind of beyond that. I think for me, and where I've seen us do well on retaining talent is, I always say that individuals don't leave organizations just for money. I think, helping them learn, grow, providing them that career growth path, and not just like promotional. I'm meaning more like, most individuals in cybersecurity are here because they have a passion for it. Yes, it's lucrative in terms of financial gain, but they're curious. They want to learn. They want to grow. Like they're constantly wanting to look at the next big thing. And so I think finding, having your staff and really trying to give them that opportunity, whether that bringing training into the team, introducing the things, but giving them that opportunity, I think is really key. I do think, from a kind of an outsourced and managed services extension of your team, that's something I know we've been at Optiv been launching new services, all in that managed service space, and even around identity, third-party risk management, different ones where organizations can leverage not everything, but it could be pieces and parts where maybe they've lost their team or their expertise in this area, or maybe it's not. When you look at your crown jewels and you look to see what do I need to protect around those, maybe it's not the center of what they do. So but it's a security control they need. I've seen them outsource those things. And I know we've been building, like I said, we're seeing a large uptick in identity, where again, skills are challenging to find and to retain in the marketplace. And if you think about identity management, there could be 3 or 4 platforms organizations have to manage. And then I call it kind of stitching it all together to look at the person end to end in terms of their identity, password authentication, login, governance, all of that. And so that's something I am seeing organizations leverage more. And I do think with kind of that uncertainty in the economy right now, which I think we're all living in. We're seeing companies kind of pull back on investments. Our clients need more help because they can't find talent. I do think we're going to see that for the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. So I do think that's a great recommendation to look at partners to help you more when you have gaps in your security program.
I think, as we look through some of the things we've talked about so far, I think that everything that you guys have learned throughout your careers, you've just a wealth of knowledge and information. When we think of this kind of last few years, this everything leading up to today, what are some of the key things that you felt like that you've learned that you would want to share with our audience?
So it's a great point, Matt. And I do think, the thing about all of this kind of culmination of really kind of aggregate cyber threat, which got so much worse during the pandemic, I think largely because, the human factor got really difficult. But all of this getting kind of worse and worse. And your question, are the good guys winning, the bad guys winning? Totally fair. I think the human factor, though, is, for me, it still becomes the overriding thing that, our workforce has to recognize that they are both our greatest point of risk and our first line of defense, right? Adopting that see something, say something mentality, getting people comfortable with the idea, putting their hand up to say, this doesn't feel right. I think I made a mistake, right? Changing the culture to be one, again, when you had your ivory tower CISOs, they were casting bolts from the blue down at those people who were messing things up. That culturally didn't work over the long term. Instead, we needed more than just sticks. We needed carrots. We needed to reward people who identified things that were problematic. We needed to recognize people who were following cybersecurity best practices. It's not enough to just give everyone those simulated phishing tests and ping their managers when they don't pass, right? When they click on the link. Instead, I think it's getting to a culture where, just as we want security embedded with the business, we want the business, frankly, seeing themselves as part of the security apparatus, recognizing that they play a role in this. Otherwise, we end up, with what Julie described, right? Which is people are either going to use shadow technology. People are going to avoid following the processes you've established. The water is going to take that path of least resistance unless you're constantly reiterating to people their roles and responsibilities in this space. So I think that end user education thematically is something we're really, really seeing. That's a theme that's not going to change. And then the other thing I would say, with all of the things we've talked about today, getting the table stakes, brass tacks things right. Those things, those foundational elements of any good cybersecurity program. Where are your assets? Where is your data? Do you have good inventory? Are you confident in your core foundational control framework? Those things never go out of style, right? And we can hire, all the partners and vendors in the world, but if we're not getting those brass tacks things right, that's where I've seen so many companies get tripped up over the last year.
No, and I agree, Rachel. I think that the controls and those brass tacks, those critical elements, like they haven't changed. And I think now what we need to do to manage those and to become efficient at those, that has changed just because of again, multiple devices. I think, Matt, you shared, nobody's taking away devices. Like we're just adding.
Yeah, the data is just growing. Data is not going down. I haven't seen a single chart from anybody that says the data isn't growing.
Data, and I would tell you that, and maybe organizations are better. I haven't been a CISO for a couple of years, but decommissioning things, we're really great at adding new to support a new business process, to support something new we need to do. But when we had to go back and decommission and identify the data, decommission, like take the access away, decommission the server. That was like,
I thought, just to interject, I thought cloud was going to solve that because of cost, and that some finance person somewhere was going to be like, hey, last year you said it was going to be X and it's 2X. You didn't tell me this. Do we need to delete 1X? Do we really need this 2X? And it hasn't solved that. The fact that you get a bill that's ever changing every month hasn't gotten anyone to wake up and start turning off the old stuff yet. I've been really surprised. I started to interject. We just encounter that so often that the source of like a breach or an incident is some long forgotten system that we didn't want to turn off because, well, someone might need it someday, right? But we also didn't want to maintain it because no one uses it. So it provides no business value. And it's really just risk. That's all it is. It's managing one risk of it not being there for your business with the other risk of it being used against you, by an insider threat or a cyber attack.
No, and one thing I'll just add to finish up too, Matt, is talk about those like brass tacks, those controls. Like I think that's table stakes still. And I would tell you a lot of organizations still struggle. And a lot of it's funding, resourcing, having like the talent because they're leaving, like they still struggle to do that. And I think if we focus on those and then also, again, aligning with that business, Rachel shared, you've got to get them they're accountable as well. So you've got to train them, educate them, and make sure they feel accountable to protect the business. I think that's key. And the third piece I would just say is, again, looking to see where your business is going, because I guarantee you, like if you have those critical controls in place, they're going to evolve what you need to do as rapidly as the business pivots. And as your business pivots and your industry pivots, you've got to look to see, okay, how is that changing my core that I need to protect the organization? And I think those three things alone will keep you busy. And many organizations just trying to keep up with that.
But
I know-
Matt, I
Go ahead.
love what you said just there. I mean, Julie, your point around asset decommissioning. Yes. I mean, the bane of our existence, right? We just accumulate more stuff. I do think though, Matt, there will be financial drivers for some of this. We can't keep pallets of every laptop that every employee has ever owned in perpetuity. We can't keep multiple copies of that data, both on-prem and in the cloud forever. And I completely agree. And I tell people this all the time, Matt, that like, it's that technical debt that's going to come back to bite you. It's not going to be the app that you are updating on a weekly basis.
It went through the review that,
Right. But,
yeah.
where you're actively maintaining that code, right? That's not going to be the app that kills you. Find that thing. I worry about this, right? Find that thing that was coded 30 years ago by some guy who is long dead with those mainframe dependencies. That's the thing that's really, that some hacker is going to find, a vulnerability in, and that's going to be the problem that bites us. I completely agree with you.
Two things I want to echo back to you guys around that. One, for me, one of the big lessons learned is, I used to be a very, what I call pure cyber person. I think, Rachel, like your former role, a little bit of offense, a little bit of defense, but very exploitation focused, right? Like we want to get, C2 on a system that isn't ours, right? Like very much like that kind of technical cyber. I've learned that a lot of organizations have focused on that and like have completely forgotten that data can still leave from their employees. That like all of us could probably email some really important stuff to each other that we shouldn't see right now, right? And that like if you're trying so hard to defend against a 0-day exploit, but you got data leaking out of like Swiss cheese from all of your different collaborative data apps. Are you really protecting the thing that you're trying to protect, right? Are you really learned that? The second thing I want to echo that you both said was about like working with the business. One thing that I've learned is that like the business actually cares about their data. If you ask them what it is that's important to them to protect, and then explain back to them that what you're doing is for that data. I'll give you like a prime example. In my last role, I was at a law firm. And what is a law firm? A law firm is a collection of attorney and client relationships and the billings that are associated with those. So each attorney would tell you that the thing they care most about is client X's data, right? But what it meant is that if we made the culture about protecting client data, that was what was core to the firm. And so if we got people to believe that the things, maybe the inconveniences that we were introducing were to protect that client data, all of a sudden it was like, okay, my password can be a little longer. We can change it a little more often. Okay, let's do that multi-factor thing. These things make sense, right? Like all these, like what we might consider to be basic security controls. Sometimes it really is getting the business involved, getting the people that generate the revenue for your company to see that it's going to benefit them, to ultimately drive that home. Now, we are, our Q&A has absolutely blown up since we started today. And so I want to give each of you the floor to just in summary, what are some things, maybe if some people tuned in late and there was one or two things that you wanted them to take away from this Data First Forum before we jump into the Q&A and start handing out some prizes. And Rachel, I'll ask you to go first. What are one or two things that you think core takeaways from today's Data First Forum?
Well, I mean, Matt, I can tell you, I think this was a great discussion. I learned a lot from you and Julie today. So this has been a pleasure. I think the ground we covered, right? Connectivity with our business, understanding what data really matters, and protecting that. The point you just made, I mean, I hear companies all the time, they're very excited about their lateral movement detection, and they think they've got all these very sophisticated tools. They're going to help them, detect China. And yet at the same time, when you look at how they're actually losing data, it's all through the Microsoft Outlook autofill functionality, right? Everyone's just misrouting data to the wrong person. I think the remote work component of this, so many of us using collaboration tools, which we know can expose data in lots of different ways. These sort of brass tack foundational controls that we talked about, where are we getting really focused on maybe the things that are very esoteric, but forgetting, the fact that the front door is open in certain cases. We didn't touch on it today, but I know it's a top concern, basically for everyone in this audience. We all have to recognize the vendors we're working with. I think about how we manage to lose data over the course of the year. Third-party risk management has got to be at the top of the list for any CISO who is trying to run a strong cybersecurity program. We have our work cut out for us. But I think, again, with partnerships like this and conversations like the one we're having today, leaves me feeling very optimistic about the future.
Julie?
Well, I would agree with many things that Rachel shared. I think if we go back to like that brass tacks, like those key controls, I would say, looking at those, doing an inventory of how well you're performing and really understanding what is your crown jewels, and how is that being, it could be like, how is their threats penetrating that, and looking to see what controls around that. But I would take it a step further and start looking at how has your business evolved over the last 6 months? How is it going to evolve in the next 12 months? And really start looking at, again, how is that data being shared from a cloud perspective, from just different collaboration apps, like anything. Because I do think that we do get sometimes excited about the latest attack, and we all run to the latest technologies, attacks, and we focus on that. But to Rachel's point, there are many open doors into your environments. I guarantee you there are, that many of you don't even realize or know. And it's just because of all the shifts and changes in the environment. But I would say that's probably the most important thing I've taken away, because I think if you do that and you start getting a better view on your assets and where they actually are, that will allow you to prioritize and focus. But Rachel made an excellent point on third-party providers. I mean, we think about the connected world that we live in today. I guarantee you the one person that you're entrusting your data to here, they may be entrusting your data or connecting to this person or this person. And so that third party risk becomes fourth, fifth, like it's being exasperated. And I think that many of us don't have a good knowledge around that. So again, I go back to those core brass tacks and understanding like assets, inventory, data, crown jewels, start there.
It's almost like it's about protecting the data first. Right. One question I want to get from one of our audience members is, they feel like they're motivated and they can get leadership on board, whether it's to get more people or to invest in solutions or services, as we've talked about so far. But when it comes down to that kind of brass tacks moment, that sometimes the commitment falls through, and they're looking. I'm sure all three of us have had to buy stuff in our careers. Probably many things, and hire many people and negotiate many contracts. Do you have any tips on really how to maintain and get that commitment, that financial commitment to kind of do something?
I mean, I'll jump in, then I'll let Rachel. I'm sure she's got lots of ideas from her background. But how I've been successful is, again, when I talk about understanding where the business is going, they're getting large amounts of money to transform the business because they have to meet regulatory requirements. They have to meet customer demands. They have to grow the business. So I've always been successful. And if I understand kind of where the business is going, be able to show our gaps to support the business in that new model, because that's where we have to shift to maintain kind of our profitability in the organization. I try to align those technologies, tools, processes, people, like all those changes to a business objective, or something's funded by the business. So that's one. And I think the other is, again, I think educating, and I hate to say this, but I still think compliance, privacy, like all of those regulations, because that landscape is still evolving and shifting because of what we talked about on remote working, data, cloud, like that's all shifting. So I think that because there are new compliance requirements and privacy requirements, those are getting a lot of attention right now. There's fines being issued. So I do think that that's another area to focus in on, to say, okay, what controls do I have gaps on that meet this, and leverage that too.
So I totally agree.
Yeah.
I think, Matt, what you said earlier, and, you and I share a lot of this background. I think for security purists coming into this space, we've got to learn when to compromise, right? And this was a big challenge for me coming into this, is that, if you want to be security perfect, what that means is that you're uncompromising on a lot of the things that our businesses actually need. And you're frequently crying wolf, right? This used to be a problem that CISOs had all the time, coming into that boardroom saying, no, this time I really mean that the sky is falling. And if we don't spend, another $10 million, we are surely to be overwhelmed by it. I think the CISOs that are succeeding today are taking a much more pragmatic approach. They're aligned with the business. They're recognizing the battles that are worth fighting, but they're becoming allies to the business and to the technology teams. In those cases, we're actually accepting a little more risk as the right answer. We can't be in, again, this sort of entrenched position where anything that introduces risk, we're saying no to. That's a great way for a CISO to get fired. But I think moving forward, that alignment with the business, and then, again, the point you're making, Matt, of let's do the most important things. Julie, as you said, we got to know what's important because that's got to be our North Star in terms of prioritization. It can't be perfect controls everywhere all the time.
I think that this segues into, and then this will be our final question. What is a mistake that either you made or you kind of helped coach someone through that you think can, that might be able to help others kind of avoid that same thing? And then I'll toss it to you first, Julie, and then I actually want to chime in because I'd like to share a personal one of mine, and then we'll pass it to you, Rachel.
And are you talking about like mistaken organization?
Yeah, let's say a career mistake, a program mistake, right? We've all been there.
I mean, I think that naturally I like to move things quickly. So I'm a driver. I like to get things done and move along. And so there was a project once that I took over. It was a large institution, and I assumed everybody was aligned and on board because the program had been in place for a year. We were moving along. So I just kind of went head at it and quickly realized after, I just call it noise across the environment, that we had never really got stakeholder buy-in and got people engaged and really got them to support the need on why we were doing it. And it was a large email migration, like over 50 email systems, right? But once I had to stop it, and I got everybody aligned, got people moving forward, but I got the buy-in. And so then the business felt like they owned that with all of us in the organization. So that's probably one. And again, I use that all the time because I think that we are all under a large amount of pressure. And so we want to move quickly. And sometimes I think that we maybe forget, but we need to collaborate and bring our alliances together because I guarantee you're going to move quicker once you get them aligned than if you're trying to put out a new technology, a new process, anything that changes how the business operates or technology. If you get them aligned, you're going to move quicker.
So for me, maybe I'll see if some of our audience members remember this. Who remembers the Heartbleed OpenSSL vulnerability? It was like a really big deal. I remember when the organization that I was with at the time, and I was coaching them through that. One mistake that I make was actually that you just brought up, Rachel, which is that, I thought of it as so important. We had active exploitation coming into our servers and our DMZ, it was real deal. There wasn't a higher level of concern to the likelihood we would be targeted and successfully exploited. But what I didn't do, or the mistake that I made, was I said, we need to patch everything as critical. And the reality is that if I could have gone back and done it differently, I would have said our external systems are critical. The applications that our attorneys use, that our vendors provide, are critical, that house our data. But the stuff that's on the inside of our network can be a next second tier priority. I don't need to, campaign to realign all resources, because it's not just money, it's also time. You're spending organizational time to do these kind of security initiatives or implement these different controls. And going back, I probably would have taken your advice, Rachel, and said, this is important. The exploitability is high, but we have a lot of controls in place to prevent an attacker from getting in our network. So it is not as high of a priority as these externally facing things.
So Matt, your story really resonates. I will tell you, I feel like we in security, we live through that story like every 6 months. I mean, I think for Log4j last December, very, very similar situation where, again, there were those, you give into that inclination to say, all of this is the end of the world. Well, no, there has to be a way to prioritize this work, to get us to a risk-based approach. And I think most of us in security have had to learn that lesson the hard way a couple of times, because again, for purists, it does appear that the sky is falling. And of course, we should drop everything and do nothing but patch for the next month. But the show must go on. And I think that's the balance we're getting better and better at striking.
And I think part of that balance is also coming here and doing stuff like this. So on behalf of me and everybody at Varonis, thank you guys for making time for us in our audience today. This has been amazing. And what I'd like to do is I'd actually like to launch a poll. We'd like to get your feedback from everybody out there in the audience. We are always striving to improve. We're always looking for and soliciting feedback. And then what we're going to do once we're able to collect all those different poll responses is we're going to be able to move on and kind of raffle off our giveaways. And so what I would do here is really kind of just 30 seconds each. You guys have the floor. Anything that you want. Any closing remarks?
Just Matt, thank you so much for having us. Julie, it is always a pleasure to get to work with you, someone who I've long considered a role model. And so again, just thanks, Matt. This has been a lot of fun.
It was a pleasure. Julie?
And I really, just the conversation, like it's not every day that you get to talk about security in this frame of reference. And so the conversation, just your experience, both of you, Rachel, you and Matt, I've really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot as well. And I also just want to thank the audience, like just reading their chats and their comments has been just great as well to see the level of engagement there.
And with that, I really do just want to say thank you. This has been a tremendous experience. I look forward to hopefully getting to attend and do another Data First forum. And hats off to my co-hosts. You guys are true rock stars and absolute titans in industry. Thank you, everyone.